going on, Headliner Nation? Welcome in to week 16 of the NFL season. I can't believe I'm saying that. This season has absolutely flown by. And for a majority of you, there's probably only 2 weeks left in your fantasy season. And this week, you're playing for a chance to go on to your championship round next weekend. Now, keep in mind, if you do play in a week 18 championship, that's an awful idea. Find a different league, but we will be here in week 18 as well to help out everybody that still needs to set their fantasy lineup. And realistically, when we get to this point of the season, we're not getting fancy, we're not going crazy, we are going with the guys that got us here. So realistically, when you watch these start and sit videos, they're gonna sound a little bit different this time of the year because right now, we're looking at matchups and we're going with the guys that are our best shot. Thursday Night Football this week could be a defensive punch them in the mouth game with two of the better defenses between the Broncos and the Chargers. There is not a fiber in my body telling me that it is okay to start any Denver running back because even after Jaleel McLaughlin left with an injury last week, Audric Estime and Javonte Williams still only combined for 13 carries. So even if McLaughlin were to miss this week and it narrows down the running back room, those guys are still going to see very similar touches. And against this defense, trying to find a guy that is actually fantasy viable is going to be tough. And even though the Broncos defense gave up over 100 rushing yards to Jonathan Taylor last week, the Los Angeles Chargers run game has been non-existent since J.K. Dobbins went down with his injury. Both Gus Edwards and Kimani Vidal haven't really shown enough explosiveness to be fantasy viable this late in the season. If you drafted Joe Mixon at his ADP, you got an absolute steal, and he has helped lead you this far into the season. But now we're going to need the rest of our teams to help pick him up a little bit. Not only is he facing one of the game's best run defenses this week, but he also could end up being limited with an ankle injury that he suffered last week. DeMeco Ryans made it sound like he's going to be fine and he's going to play, but we don't know that for sure as of yet. And the Texans have already wrapped up their division. At this point, giving Mixon a little bit more of a break could end up being in their best interest. Isaiah Pacheco and Kareem Hunt have to be high-risk players going into this matchup. Not only did they see split touches last week, but they're going up against Houston's defense, which has allowed very few fantasy points and yards to running back so far this season. And on top of that, Kareem Hunt was actually more efficient this past week than Isaiah Pacheco, which is not what we want to see. The first 3 games of week 16 all have the potential to be very boring if you like offense, because Pittsburgh and Baltimore also could be another matchup where a whole lot of fantasy points are not scored. Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren only combined for 26 rushing yards last weekend against a very similar run defense. And more than likely, Baltimore is also going to stack them up more again this week. Neither of these guys have a whole lot of upside. And if you have to start Najee Harris, just assume that he's going to be a guy that's going to be more like an RB2 or RB3. Now, if you had to play last week and Derrick Henry was on your team, you were not happy with the outcome. From an overall football standpoint, it wasn't all that bad, but you could potentially expect similar numbers this week because when Baltimore played Pittsburgh just a couple of weeks ago, Henry only ran for 65 yards on 13 carries. He did score a touchdown though, which hopefully this week he can end up doing again. Tyrone Tracy's fumbles got him in the doghouse, and it just doesn't feel like he's been able to get out of it. Devin Singletary is seeing some very split touches right now and even scored a touchdown last week. And in a matchup going up against Atlanta, who has a very solid run defense, it doesn't feel like risking our fantasy season really is all that smart. Now, I know so far in the start and sits, we haven't found a whole lot of upside out of the running backs. More will end up coming, but I feel like this late in the season, we really need to play it way more safe than what we have been. But I'm really liking Bijan Robinson this week. It's actually kind of crazy to think about how much higher could his ceiling have been the last few weeks if Kirk Cousins wasn't turning the ball over so often. He had another 100 rushing yards this past week and could absolutely top that once again against the New York Giants. Now, over on Underdog, his current projection is only 88.5 rushing yards. And because he has over that amount over the last 3 games, I'm absolutely willing to buy into that once again, and I'll go higher than the 88.5 rushing yards that he currently has set. And if you know me and you've heard me talk about it this season, I really don't like to go with lines that are that high. But given that it's Bijan Robinson and Kirk Cousins has been struggling, I think he hits it once again. People have been saying, what if when it comes to Jahmyr Gibbs? What if he was on a team by himself and was utilized as the primary back? Well, now he's going to get that shot. And going up against a Chicago Bears defense that has been soft against the run, he's got a shot to have a huge week. And he could be a top 3 back for sure. This isn't going to be a game where Detroit's just going to be able to go in and throw the ball almost 60 times like they did against the Buffalo Bills. They're going to need to be way more balanced. And Jahmyr Gibbs could show some of that massive upside that we've kind of been waiting to see. Swift was really solid against the Minnesota Vikings, which was hard to believe because he's been so terrible, and Minnesota's defense has been very good against the run. But this Detroit defense is absolutely depleted. They have 21 starters on injured reserve right now. A majority of them are from the defense, and because of that, Swift could have another solid day. I know there is still going to be some risk with him because he's been up and down all season, and there's still going to be some decent players on the line for Detroit, but losing Aleem McNeil, basically the majority of your linebackers, and now Carlton Davis is going to make things tough for Detroit to stop teams consistently. Nick Chubb is down and out for the rest of the season, unfortunately, but Jerome Ford will end up being the lead back once again. Now, he only had 7 rushing attempts last week, and that's going to be the major concern with him in a matchup against Cincinnati. He definitely could showcase some of that big playability that we've seen from him the last couple of years, but if he doesn't get enough volume because Cincinnati's blowing the doors off Cleveland, that's when you're going to have some concern. But even if Cincinnati's not blowing the doors off Cleveland, they may still throw the ball 40 plus times to try and keep up with Cincinnati. That could lead to a lot of risk for Jerome Ford not being able to reach any type of ceiling. But if we see some big plays, he may still have an okay floor. Chase Brown has 4 touchdowns in the last 3 games, and he has 6 straight top 12 performances. I absolutely love what this offense is doing with Chase Brown right now. It's something they never really did with Joe Mixon, but hey, better late than never. They're utilizing him in the passing game, and they're putting him in situations to find the end zone. That's why he continues to be a safe start. Right now, we're waiting to hear more on Tony Pollard because he re-aggravated his ankle injury last week, and Tyjae Spears ended up finishing the game. If Tony Pollard can't go this week, then Tyjae Spears is going to become a low-risk start for me. Now, if Tony Pollard does end up playing, both of these guys will sit at a medium risk because I do see a path to both of them being fantasy viable. Now, that doesn't mean that Tony Pollard still isn't going to be a risky play because the ceiling that we've seen from him probably won't be there. Okay floor, but Tyjae Spears would have the ceiling this week because this is a pretty decent matchup where both of them could end up thriving. I'm going to put Jonathan Taylor as a low-risk play this week. I think he's going to try and make up for that massive mistake last week where he dropped the ball before going into the end zone. And hopefully Shane Steichen gives him the opportunity to do that because if he gets thrown into the doghouse as well, fantasy owners are going to be irate. We really need Kyren Williams to have one of those big games this week. He wasn't able to find the end zone last week, but he did run for 100 yards. Now we need to get both of those things going, where we can get him into the end zone and running for over 100 yards. Because if we can do that against the Jets, that would be massive for the upside for our fantasy teams, where a lot of top-tier running backs don't have the best matchups in the world this week. Breece Hall only had 9 carries last week. Now, he ended up finding the end zone, which really helped save his fantasy day. But even with the things going on behind him, it's really tough to trust any of these running backs right now. Because Braylon Allen is even getting outplayed by Isaiah Davis, who's getting more looks. When you take a look at those two guys, neither of them are fantasy startable. Even if Breece Hall were to miss for some reason, I don't see how we could pick Braylon Allen or Isaiah Davis. I would lean Isaiah Davis if you absolutely had to. But for right now, Breece Hall, he's still going to be a start. But unfortunately, because of that volume we saw last week, I don't see nearly as much confidence in it. The only thing we need to ask ourselves about Saquon Barkley right now is how healthy is he? The Philadelphia Eagles are playing for that home field advantage spot, so we know Saquon Barkley is going to do everything possible to be out there, and this is a great matchup. But last week he had to leave in the middle of the game, and he didn't return until later because he is banged up. Any type of a massive lead by the Eagles could lead to fewer snaps by Saquon Barkley. And they could even look at this as the potential to say, hey, we need to rest him a little bit more often. But if they're going to get that number 1 overall seed, they need to keep pace with not only the division wins, but winning overall, because Detroit owns that tiebreaker right now. If it weren't for the fact that Austin Ekeler is on IR, Brian Robinson would be a high-risk play in this matchup. But because he's going to get a majority of the touches out of the running back spot, I do believe he is more of a medium-risk play. We need a few targets in the passing game, and we need him to score a touchdown. Both of those things could end up happening. James Conner is getting hot at the right time, and he has the playoff schedule to absolutely back that up. And that's why he's going to be my Manscaped must-play running back of the week. And maybe this pick is low-hanging fruit, but I cannot overemphasize the fact that fantasy owners all year long have been dealing with an okay floor from James Conner, but not the type of ceiling we really were hoping for. And now in the fantasy playoffs, this could end up being a guy that single-handedly helps us run to the championship. And after having back-to-back top 10 weeks, he could find himself inside the top 10 once again, going up against the Carolina Panthers. Now, let's just hope Kyler Murray doesn't turn the ball over too often, because if he does, that's going to take opportunities away from James Conner. But if they can hold on to the football and really rely on Conner this week, he's got top 10 potential written all over him once again. Now, the holiday season is upon us, and if you still need some last-minute gifts, then you need to grab those from Manscaped.com. They have a ton of great tools that all the people in your life would be lucky to have. And if you're trying to think outside the box and find something for somebody that maybe they don't already have, Manscaped.com can help with that. And when you check out, use code word Headliners20 because you're going to get 20% off your entire order and free shipping. But if James Conner has the week that I think he can, his current projection over on Underdog of only 77.5 rushing yards feels way too low. James Conner has a great ceiling this week, but he also has a super safe floor and should once again be a great fantasy asset. I feel like Chuba Hubbard could get back to being a safe start for us this week. Didn't have a great game last week, but this game against Arizona, I don't really see any type of a blowout happening. And because Bryce Young had a tougher game last week as well, I do think relying on Chuba Hubbard against Arizona is probably smart for this offense to try and control the game as much as possible. It's the fantasy playoffs, and Aaron Jones is healthy. Knock on wood. 3 top 24 performances over the last 4 weeks, and an offense that's playing very well right now, and right behind Detroit for the lead in the NFC North. They've got 1 game left against them as well. So we'll see what happens with Aaron Jones over the next couple of weeks. But for right now, he's a really good play in any fantasy lineup. So if Kenneth Walker ends up missing again this week, then Zach Charbonnet stays at a medium risk for me. If Kenneth Walker ends up playing, then both of these guys are probably going to be high risk. Minnesota's defense has been tough against the run. DeAndre Swift somehow this past week had a decent game, but going up against these guys, it really depends on whether or not Seattle ends up getting blown out, because we don't know if Geno Smith is going to play yet. If he doesn't and Sam Howell has turnovers and keeps giving the ball to Minnesota, we could see similar numbers to what Zach Charbonnet put up last week. Ramondre Stevenson has lost a lot of that upside that we saw earlier in the year, but he still has an okay floor for right now. If you're putting him in your lineup and you're hoping that he hits RB1 type numbers, you're setting yourself up for failure. But if you're somebody that can play him as like a flex option, then you have an opportunity for a little bit more of a ceiling, because he could reach some low-end RB2 numbers. And in this matchup, it might be a little bit more difficult for him to get super high, but I still wouldn't be shocked if he doesn't find the end zone, or at least gives you a solid fantasy day. James Cook had a solid day in Week 15 against the Lions defense, and in Week 16, he's going to get a New England defense that he also could have solid numbers against, but nobody's coming here to talk about James Cook. You all are starting him. You're probably going to be asking about Ray Davis, who scored a touchdown, or Ty Johnson that had over 100 receiving yards. Here's my answer to both of them. Heck no. It was a part of the Buffalo game plan last week to target the Detroit linebackers, who are depleted. In the past, the Detroit linebackers have been really good in pass coverage against those running backs swinging out of the backfield. But because Jack Campbell is the only starter left from opening day, right now it's really tough for Detroit's linebackers to get back in coverage, given the fact that none of them really have that ability to do so. Buffalo had a calculated offensive game plan. It worked really, really well, but it's not going to be the same against New England. We've kind of been let down by Travis Etienne and Tank Bigsby here over the last few weeks, but this is an opportunity for them to help us get into the fantasy championships because Travis Etienne and Tank Bigsby both have decent floors against this Raiders defense. Travis Etienne has a little bit higher of a ceiling, and Tank Bigsby may be just a tad bit safer, but both of these guys should be startable, especially if you're looking for a flex option. Now, there hasn't been an official update on Sincere McCormick, but it sounds like he might be dealing with an ankle injury, and Alexander Mattison was the guy to kind of take over after he was ruled out. But Ameer Abdullah also could end up being a decent play this week, going up against this Jacksonville defense that always seems to give up a lot of points. So we will kind of have to wait and see what happens with McCormick. If he ends up being ruled out, both Abdullah and Alexander Mattison could be worth a potential flex start. If Sincere McCormick ends up playing, then that's going to rule out Alexander Mattison for me. But if Desmond Ridder does end up being the starting quarterback, Abdullah could be a guy that we flex in PPR leagues. After some worry whether or not Isaac Guerendo was even going to be able to play on Thursday Night Football, he got out there and had an okay game. From a fantasy perspective, it wasn't great, but turning around on short rest to come back and play while he was banged up definitely was good to see, because with the extra rest, hopefully he's 100% healthy for this matchup against Miami. Now, it is a tougher matchup, and if Miami's offense actually plays well in this game and San Francisco's playing from behind, you won't see much of Guerendo. But hopefully Guerendo will see enough touches that he could also potentially find the end zone and have a solid fantasy day for owners who are still needing to flex him. Devon Achane on the ground has been really bad as of recent. He's not showing nearly the type of upside that we would like to see from him in the run game, which is limiting some of his upside overall. But he's seeing quite a few targets still with Tua, and because of that, it keeps him as a safe start for us because he's able to put together those fantasy points in half PPR and full PPR leagues. Tampa Bay was able to blow out the LA Chargers last week, and even with the positive game script for the run game, that is still a tough Chargers run defense. But Bucky Irving and Rachaad White showcased that they both could be fantasy viable. And in a much better matchup against Dallas this week, I think both of them have top 24 floors, and if you're needing somebody as an RB2, both of them could be played. Rico Dowdle has now put up 3 straight games with at least 100 rushing yards, and for those of you that had him on the roster but have been playing him sparingly throughout the season, you've definitely been rewarded over the last few weeks. Now, this matchup is not nearly as good on the ground as it is through the air. Tampa Bay does a much better job at stopping the run than the pass, and if for some reason Tampa Bay is playing out in front of Dallas, I also don't see a lot of touches coming Rico Dowdle's way. He's going to have more risk to him this week than what we've seen over the last 3 weeks. We'll have a big question mark on Monday Night Football, and if you're an Alvin Kamara owner, I really hope you have Kendre Miller, because if you don't, we may not know about Alvin Kamara till sometime on Monday, which means you're going to need to bench him in favor of somebody else. You need to be active on the waiver wire if you have Kamara and not a whole lot of backup options. Now, given the nature of his injury, it sounds like Kamara is dealing with maybe a growing issue or something in the abductor region, which, if that's the case, he's going to be a risky start no matter what. Even if they say Alvin Kamara is good to go, I could see very limited touches for him this week. Now, if you're trying to play Kendre Miller instead, that might not be an awful option. I just don't see a great ceiling because personally, I think Green Bay wins this game handedly, and if they do, they're not going to be able to run the ball all that much. And if Green Bay does win this game easily, then Josh Jacobs should smash his projection over on Underdog of 84.5 rushing yards. This is a really good matchup for him, and it's also a good game script matchup for him. So if he can put it all together this week and Green Bay's offense can show out, Josh Jacobs is going to have another big week. There you have it, Headliner Nation. My entire breakdown for the running back position here in Week 16. Only 2 more running back videos to go this season. Crazy to think about. Hit the like button for me. Subscribe if you're new here. Turn on the bell notifications. Anytime we drop new content, you'll know about it right away. Headliner Nation, have a great rest of the day. Stay safe, stay healthy, and I'll catch you all in the next episode of the Fantasy Headliner.